So today we're going to look at the reciprocal functions, so cosecant, secant, and cotangent, for what we were doing yesterday with finding trig ratio. So we're going to start off again with drawing our all students take classes, but this time we're going to add to it. So all students take classes, our second quadrant is where sine is positive, third is where tangent is positive, fourth is where cosine is positive. So right now I'm also going to add the reciprocals. So if sine is positive, that means it's reciprocal. Cosecant is also positive. If tangent is positive, cotangent is also positive. And if cosine is positive, then secant, its reciprocal, is also positive. So along with this, I'm again going to write down the chart that you have memorized by heart. Sine, cosine, tangent, 30 degrees, which is pi over 6, 45, pi over 4, 60, pi over 3, and then I have 1 over 2, root 2 over 2, root 3 over 2, and then backwards, root 3 over 2, root 2 over 2, 1 over 2, and then tangent, root 3 over 3, 1, root 3. And again, my unit circle, one comma 0, 0 comma 1, negative 1, 0, 0, negative 1. Okay, so again, using the same three things that I've been using to find my trig ratios. Okay, so let's look at a cosecant of 120. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw my angle, just like I did yesterday. 120 degrees is in the second quadrant. So if I look at all students take classes, so cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. Right, so because sine is positive, cosecant is also positive in the second quadrant. Now let's find the reference angle. 120 degrees is how many degrees away from the x-axis? So 180 minus 120 gives you 60 degrees. So we're finding cosecant of 60 degrees. So 60 degrees is in our chart. We're going to be using our chart. We need to remember that cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So we know that sine of 60 degrees is root 3 over 2. So to find cosecant, we're just going to flip it. It turns into 2 over root 3. Cannot have a square root in the denominator. So it leaves us with 2 root 3 over 3. And it's positive, so this is my trig ratio. So let's look at B. Again, we're going to draw this. 225 degrees. It's between 180 and 270, so it's in the third quadrant. Now in the third quadrant, tangent is positive, which means cotangent is also positive. 225 is how far away from the x-axis. We're going to do 225 minus 180. Which gives us 45, so we're finding cotangent of 45. Again, because it's a reciprocal, let's first look at tangent of 45. Tangent of 45 is 1. So cotangent of 45, when you flip 1, it's still 1. It's positive. There's my trig ratio. So secant of 90 degrees, let's draw 90 degrees. So 90 degrees is pointing straight up. We already know this is a quadrantal angle. So for this one, we don't use all students take classes. We're going to use the unit circle. Now this one right here, when it's at 90 degrees, it's pointing straight up. We're going to use this point, 0, 1. 0, 1 is our x and our y, and we know our r is always equal to 1. So for secant, we're going to look at our ratio for secant. It is r over x. We know r is 1. Our x value here is 0. And because we cannot divide by 0, this is undefined. Okay, so for D, again, we're going to first draw 7 pi over 4. So using what we talked about yesterday, if your denominator is 4, we know pi is 4 over 4, because that gives you 1 pi. 2 pi must be 8 pi over 4. 2 pi times 4 over 4 gives you 8 over 4. So 7 pi over 4 just must be 1 less than 8 pi over 4. So it's in the 4th quadrant. In the 4th quadrant, we're looking up at our all students take classes. And so secant in the 4th quadrant is going to be positive because cosine is positive. So this is positive secant. And our reference angle, like we talked about, is just going to be pi over the denominator. So it's pi over 4. And now we're going to look for the reciprocal of cosine. So we're going to find cosine of pi over 4, which is root 2 over 2. And we're going to flip that. So when we flip it, we get 2 over root 2. We need to multiply by itself to get the square root out of the denominator. You have 2 square root 2 over root 2 times root 2 gives you 2. Be careful here that you cancel out because the 2 over 2 can be simplified. It just leaves you with root 2. Okay, tangent. Again, we're going to draw this using what we learned yesterday. This is 6 pi over 6. Over here will be 12 pi over 6. And 5 pi over 6 is 1 less. So it's going to be in the 2nd quadrant. In the 2nd quadrant, only sine and cosecant are positive, so this must be negative. And negative tangent, again, our reference angle is just pi over the denominator, which is pi over 6. We're going to look at tangent of pi over 6, which is root 3 over 3. And we just put a negative in front of it. That's our trig ratio. So part 2 of this is looking at some questions that ask us about when trig ratios are positive or negative. So again, we're going to be using our all students take classes. So sine, tangent, cosine. And again, the reciprocals. So sine and cosecant are reciprocals, tangent, cotangent are reciprocals, and then cosine and secant are reciprocals. Okay, so let's look at A. We're looking for when sine and cosine have the same sign. Which quadrants do sine and cosine have the same sign? So in quadrant number 1, sine is positive and cosine is positive because they're all positive. So quadrant 1, sine and cosine have the same sign. In quadrant 2, sine is positive, but cosine is negative because it's not here, so they don't have the same sign. In quadrant 3, sine is negative and cosine is negative because they're both not here, so they do have the same sign. In quadrant 4, sine is negative because it's not here and cosine is positive, so again they don't have the same sign, so for A it's just 1 and 3. For part B, now we're looking for when cotangent and cosine have opposite sides. So for this one, I'm actually going to draw a little picture here. So in the first quadrant, cotangent is positive and cosine is positive because they're both positive. So they don't have opposite signs. In the second quadrant, cotangent is negative because it's not here. And cosine is also negative because it's also not here. So again, don't have opposite signs. In the third quadrant, cotangent is positive and cosine is negative, so they do have opposite signs. So in the third quadrant, yes, they have opposite signs. And then in the fourth quadrant, cotangent is negative because it's not here, and cosine is positive. So again, they have opposite signs, which means 3 and 4 are the answer for part B. Okay, for C, we're looking for when secant is less than 0, so that means secant is negative. and tangent is greater than 0, which means it's positive. So secant is negative in the second quadrant, so this is when secant is negative, and also the third quadrant. But secant's positive here, and all of them are positive here. And now let's look for where tangent is positive. So tangent is positive in the first quadrant, and tangent is also positive in the third quadrant. So the quadrant where both of these is true is going to be our third quadrant. Finally, part D, we want tangent to be negative because it's less than 0, and cosecant to be positive because it's greater than 0. So tangent is negative in the second quadrant and the fourth quadrant, and then cosecant is positive in the first quadrant and in the second quadrant. So the one where they're both true is going to be our second quadrant. Ooh.